Hello everybody and welcome back to Lost Planeswalker. You are here with me, Jesse the Lost Planeswalker, and today we're doing a Duskmourn commander deck with Valgavoth Terror Eater. This is that giant 9-drop Elder Demon that's controlling the House of Duskmourn. This is going to be a video that focuses around sacrifice. Now there's two different ways to play Valgavoth, and I want you to be clear about that. So let's read how he works and see why I decided to go the route I did. So, Valgavoth, Terror Eater, 6, black, legendary creature, Elder Demon with flying, lifelink, ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. If a card you don't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So, we have a really interesting effect here with Valgavoth, Terror Eater, right? This is a giant card. It has lifelink and flying, which is great because we want to use that life to help cast those spells. But basically, if you decide to mill, sacrifice, any way you can put cards in your opponent's graveyard, we get to exile those cards and then potentially cast them later on. Now, it took me a while to read through it. I was trying to figure out how exactly it worked because it has some weird things about cards you don't control. And basically, if you would control a creature when you cast it, it's not going to go back into exile. It'll then finally go into their graveyard. So potentially, if they're playing a graveyard deck, and you're casting their best pieces and then those best pieces die, they're going to get them back, which is something interesting to think about when you're playing this card. But the two main ways to build it is either mill or sacrifice. I think those are the two best ways to clear your opponent's boards or get stuff into their bin that then you can exile and cast yourself. I decided to go the sacrifice route. I think there's a lot more cards that fit into that and help you benefit from sacrifice. Of course, there's a lot of really great mill in black, but if we had blue as well, it would just be 10 times better. And if I'm being honest, I think that Valgavoth here, this is going to be a interesting deck to look at what it would be if you built him, but I think he works kind of better as a 99 card. And I say that because reanimating him with cheap spells is a better way to get him on the battlefield than casting it at latest on turn 9 if you happen to hit a land drop every turn. Now, of course, we have mana ramp in this deck. We're gonna look at, lots of sacrifice, lifelink, mana ramp, additional good stuff. But if you're looking at how to build this and you want to focus on sacrifice, this is a video you want to pay attention to. So let's dive right in and look at sacrifice with some of the best cards you play to sacrifice them with Accused Marauder, Fleshbag Marauder, and Merciless Executioner. All three of these have the same clause. When they enter, each player sacrifices a creature. Now, Accused Marauder has the additional text of saying a non-token creature, which is a little bit better, and it actually is less mana to play. So it's very nice, and casting these will help us clear the board, and if we have Valgavoth out there, we'll get a ton of permanents that we can then cast. Looking at some other options, though, we have Mass Sacrifice. So we have Hellish Rebuke, Make an Example, and Vaughn's Hunger here. So Hellish Rebuke, 2 in a black instant. Until end of turn, permanents your opponents control gain when this permanent deals combat damage to a player who cast Hellish Rebuke. Sack this permanent, you lose 2 life. I really love this card. This punishes people for swinging out and attacking you. If you're attacking with a ton of little tokens or, a ton of small creatures, this is a great way to deal a ton of damage back to them whenever they hit you, and then they get sacrificed, leaving them wide open. Make an Example is a sorcery that says each opponent separates the creatures they control into 2 piles. For each opponent, you choose one of their piles. Each opponent sacks the creatures in the chosen pile. So your opponents really have to decide what pile of stuff they want to give you, and then you can kind of choose what you want to cast with Valgavoth. So I think that this is also a very nice card. And Vaughn's Hunger, very similar. 2 in a black instant. If you have the City's Blessing, which you're probably playing this when Valgavoth's out, so you will at that point, each opponent sacks a creature. If you have the City's Blessing instead, each opponent sacks half the creatures he or she controls rounded up. A little less control there, but it is only 3 mana and you can cast at an instant speed, so it is super powerful there. Next up, let's look at some controlled sacrifice. This is going to be sacrifice that persists every turn, putting pressure onto our opponents. We have Braid's Arisen Nightmare, Butcher of Malakir, and Shieldred Whispering One. So Braid's Arisen Nightmare, 3 black, leisure creature nightmare. At the beginning of your end step, you may sack an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sack a permanent that shares a card with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 and you draw a card. This essentially fuels you or helps put your opponents back in the early game, and in the late game really puts pressure on your opponents and lets you draw into a bunch of cards, which is very nice. Butcher of Malakir, another great card, but it is very expensive at 7 mana, just like Shieldred we're going to talk about next. But creature, vampire, warrior with flying, and when it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacks a creature. One of the most hard things about playing against a sacrifice deck is that a lot of their cards just feed into each other. So the first set of cards we talked about, where you play those and instantly sacrifice them, Butcher is going to see that and just make your opponent sacrifice another one, kind of putting them down even more. You know, these cards can get oppressive, so I would be wary what kind of play group you're playing with. You're playing with a lot of newer players, you know, and who aren't experienced to this or know how powerful this is, you know, maybe be nice and let them know and say, hey, this card is a threat. Honestly, I kind of stay away from these effects because they can get a little oppressive, but this deck is supposed to be very powerful, so I included it. Just like we have Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact, which are also the same effects that are very, very strong. Next up, we have Sheloldred, Whispering One, 5 black, ledger creature, Praetor with Swamp Walk, and at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a great way to cheat things into play, including the Butcher of Malakir here, but at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacks a creature, making sure that we're going to keep our opponents continuing to play cards just so their best things don't get destroyed, and if they can't do that, well, they got to start sacrificing their important permanents. And lastly here, we have Sacrifice for Value. We're going to get some great ways where we can use our cards or our opponent's cards to gain some value by casting them with Valgavoth, but we have Corrupted Conviction, Valgavoth's Faithful, and Victimize. Corrupted Conviction, single black instant. As an additional cost, cast this spell, sack a creature, just draw 2. Pretty nice. I want to show this off because it's from the new set. I think that this is a pretty great card. Valgavoth's Faithful is a single black creature human cleric, 3 and a black, sack it, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. This is a nice little card that if you get some good stuff in your bin, just sacrifice it and you can put it onto the battlefield at a discounted rate, so I really like that. And then Victimize, 2 and a black sorcery, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sack a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. This is a all-star card. Victimize is so good. If you don't play it in your black decks where you're, you know, putting a ton of creatures in the bin, or you just have a lot of very big expensive stuff, I would. You get some amazing value with this card. Even though they enter tapped, you can get whatever you want, so it's really, really nice. The rest of those sacrifice cards here, we have our Archon of Cruelty, Deadly Dispute, Dictate of Erebos, Doomed Necromancer, Ghoulcaller Giza, Gix's Command, Grave Pact, Innocent Blood, Invoke Despair, Liliana Dreadhorde General, Meathook Massacre 2, Phyrexian Obliterator, Plaguecrafter, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, Rankle, Master of Pranks, Rottenmouth Viper, Sheloldred, Sheloldric's Edict, Smallpox, Soul Shatter, Terragrid, God of Fright, The Eldest Reborn, and Village Rites. So next up, we're going to get into even more cards, talking about lifelink, mana ramp, and then some other good stuff to include in this deck. But before we do so, I would just like to say, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed this Duskmourn Commander deck video, or just enjoy watching other Commander decks, I'm going to be putting out a ton for this set. In addition, soon after this, you should see a video covering the first precon and some cards I think would be very powerful to add to that deck. So diving right in and looking at these lifelink creatures I think would be fun to include. We want to gain a pretty good amount of life in this deck, so I have a number of lifelink creatures to do so. We have Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, Mask of Griselbrand, and the Haunt of Hightower. Crick, Son of Yawgmoth is 4 Phyrexian black, Phyrexian black, Phyrexian black, legendary creator, Phyrexian Hoarder minion with lifelink, and for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana, and whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. Crick here is a pretty great card. We did get a couple reprints of him recently, so his price has dropped a lot, and he would be excellent for a deck like this. Not only buffing him up a ton by casting a ton of black spells and then gaining a ton of life to then use with Valgavoth, but he's just a staple card in a life gain strategy deck, which we are trying to do here. Mask of Griselbrand, 1 black, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature has flying and lifelink, and whenever equipped creature dies, you may pay X life, where X is its power. If you do, draw X cards. I really love Mask of Griselbrand. It offers a lot of versatility. Now, it does cost a little bit to cast and equip it, where you have some other options that are cheaper. So if you want to do that, you know, go ahead. But I think the flying and lifelink are really important, and then you have that added benefit of potentially drawing a ton of cards off of whatever creature dies. And the Haunt of Hightower, 4 black, legendary creature vampire with flying and lifelink. When it attacks, defending player discards a card. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Haunt of Hightower. We are certainly going to be putting a lot of cards into their bin, making this very big very quickly, gaining us a ton of life whenever it can hit. So now moving on to mana ramp, we have some pretty stapley cards, but I think are really good here. We have Black Market, Jet Medallion, and Throne of Eldraine. Black Market, 3 black enchantment. When a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black for each charge counter on Black Market. This card goes very hard very quickly, and if we can play this on turn 5 and play a spell and kill some creatures, we can very easily cast our commander and have mana to spare afterwards just from this card. These charge counters continue to add turn after turn, and because commander has 4 players, and they're going to be attacking each other, we get to put counters on it based on that as well. So this is a very fun card. Jet Medallion, of course, we're playing a mono black deck. This is going to discount almost every spell we play, so it's definitely worth including. And then Throne of Eldraine, 5 generic legendary artifact. As it enters, choose a color. It'll be black in this case, of course. You can tap it to add 4 mana of the chosen color. Spend this mana only to cast mono-colored spells of that color. Very easy here, but 3 and tap, draw 2. Spend this mana of the chosen color to activate this ability. So we're going to have to use our swamps or cards that generate black mana. And lastly, we have the good stuff that I think are just some fun cards to play and would be very powerful in this deck. We have Urborg Scavengers, Vein Ripper, and Whip of Erebos. Urborg Scavengers, 2 and a black creature spirit. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a target card from graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on it. It has flying as long as a card exiled has flying, and the same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So not only once we play our opponent's stuff and then it dies a second time and it gets put back in their bin, do we take advantage of it? But with Urborg Scavengers, we can just exile it again for good and get benefits of our own. Vein Ripper here, an all-star card in Standard especially. I think it's gone down a little bit. I think they did ban a couple of the very prolific vampire cards that were making this so powerful, but 3 black creature vampire assassin with flying, ward, sack a creature, and whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. If we're playing a lot of sacrifice in this deck, this is great because of the ward, and additionally, our opponents are going to lose a lot and we're going to gain a lot. And then Whip of Erebos, I love this card. I think this should go in almost any black deck that really cares about attacking and gaining a ton of life, because it just gives all creatures lifelink. Doesn't care if they're attacking or blocking, and then it also has a subtle reanimator piece on the bottom, so I think that that's very good to get back a key piece to attack for a turn or whatnot. But let's run through the rest of those good stuff cards here with Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal, Alhammart's Archive, Animate Dead, Arcane Signet, Caged Sun, Cryptghast, Dance of the Dead, Demonic Console, Exsanguinate, Funeral Room / Awakening Hall, Gifted Etherborn, Lightning Greaves, Night's Whisper, Nighthawk Scavenger, Sign in Blood, Soul Ring, Siphon Mind, Thran Dynamo, and Vampire Nighthawk. Now, of course, I leave the land base up to you. Lands, of course, are very variable. The 4 lands I have in here are Cabal Coffers, Cabal Stronghold, Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, and Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, and just those are about $150. So that's why I leave the land base up to you. If you have any of these or would consider purchasing them, great. If you can't, you're playing a mono black deck, swamps don't hurt. And there's a lot of other great utility cards that generate black mana as well that are worth playing. But with that, I would just like to say thank you so much for watching. What do you think about this deck? Do you think that sacrifice is the right way to go? Or do you think mill is stronger? Let me know. If this video gets enough attention, I may build the mill deck just to kind of see how that works instead. In addition, if you would please leave a like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe, that would mean the world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now today's Scryfall card of the day is Zyra Arryn, a regular guest at the Royal Masquerade. Arryn is the envy of the court. She appears in a new costume every hour. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.